Hello, everyone. Greetings from Dubai and a very warm welcome to another episode on In Conversation with Roy, a forum where we try and dissect great leaders and their ways of success making. And in doing so, I have the great honor of welcoming Sameer Nagarajan today in my show. Thank you so much, Sameer, for your time. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Roy. I think it's it's an honor to be with you, and I'm delighted to be. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful.
I'm sure it's going to be very insightful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sameer. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine as usual. Sameer, of course, is the global president HR for Cadila Pharma, a sector that is in the news for the right reasons. And obviously, he has traversed the globe actually through FMCG and distribution and retail and so on and so forth. And finally, what Switzerland couldn't do to him, what Dubai couldn't do to him, is what India has done to him lately, rather. So brought him back to his roots. Pharma was always his love earlier, and it is but natural that karma dictates that you come back to your first love, right?
True. So I spent about till 2011 working in India. I started in 1988 and worked till 2011 in India.
Mm-hmm.
Then spent 3 years in Switzerland with Unilever, 2 years in Sri Lanka with Unilever Sri Lanka.
Correct.
3 years with Dabur in Dubai as head of HR for the international business. Then I spent a year actually taking a break. I did coaching, consulting, reading and writing, and then joined Cadila in December of 2020. So yeah, been around a bit.
Brilliant. It's been a journey, all right. And probably this session will also try and probably dissect it a bit for our viewers and the audience at large. Let me start off with a quote. Lawrence Bossidy of G Capital once remarked, I'm convinced that there's nothing more important than hiring and developing people. At the end of the day, we bet on people, not on strategies. So would you agree with this concept?
Well, absolutely. I think, Roy, I've seen great strategies being developed and failing at the altar of execution. And I think, you can have ideas. I think you can have ideas. You can have thoughts. You can design great strategies. You can have great plans. But if you don't put the right manpower, or manpower is a politically incorrect term nowadays, but if you don't put the right quality and quantity of people behind the execution of a plan, it flops. I think side by side with people, execution is emerging as a key capability. And equally much, I think getting the right people into the place who can contribute to ideas and thoughts, to strategy development and to the formulation of plans, people who can look outward and see the big picture, people who can convert the big picture into detail and so on. I think all of that requires different kinds of people, different capabilities, working together in an organization and, very focused on a goal. So I think, yes, I think ultimately it boils down to people. Absolutely. I would agree with this.
And probably, coming back to COVID time, COVID times threw in a lot of business models, a lot of variants, a lot of coping methodologies in terms of how we're going to deal with this crisis, business continuity, and so on and so forth. What it also brought across is very, very peculiar coinages. So there's a term which is an addendum to, let's say, work from home and the new normal. There's a professor from Texas, it's called Anthony Clodes. So he came back with the coinage of the great resignation or the great exodus. So if you look at the millennials and Generation Z, they are looking at purpose and meaning in their jobs. So that they will quit the jobs than to stay in unfulfilling jobs daily. So that's the new reality of it all. At a time when we are slightly circumspect in terms of holding on to our jobs, being very insecure about what lays next. There's also a section of the populace who believes that there's a gig economy in place and there is a pro bono and so on and so forth. That's where I think my future lies. So your thoughts on that, though?
Well, I think we are at a unique point in business history where we actually, in different parts of the world, have 5 generations at the workplace. I don't think this has happened ever before.
Yeah.
And I think each generation is defined by a very, very different outlook on the entire concept of life and employment. And, my generation, for example, would typically looked at a job as a source of security. We come from a background where it was important to get a job, keep it, and keep working at it.
Right.
So it wasn't, there were not too many options at that time. But, it was important, whether it was public sector, private sector, government, entrepreneurship was not considered a very favorable option. The capital was scarce at that time. So it was the whole expectation was that you would have a job and you would stay in it until you retired. And
Correct.
I'd say the concept of the organizational loyalty contract was already declining a little bit by then, although that process accelerated in the mid-90s. But it was still there to some extent.
Right.
That, if you are loyal to an organization and you stay with it for a while, it will stay loyal to you.
Right.
And I think obviously attitudes have changed. And I think the most recent generation to enter the workforce I think they're very intelligent people, they're very smart people. And I think the entire push that they're providing towards, asking very probing and searching questions around what is your vision, what is your relevance to society, what greater social good do you stand for, is also combined with some practical stuff in life. So, for example, they're not. I don't see so much of an interest, for example, in buying cars or buying apartments, or which again would have probably been a defining feature of some generation, or at least one of the defining features. Let's put it that way. So I think there is actually a keen desire to see action on the ground and to be a force for change on the ground, which is in a social and environmental context, using the word environment more contextually than just ecology.
Sure.
So I think, yes, and it's a huge challenge for organizations, I think, to meet the needs of an extremely diverse workforce, extremely diverse and heterogeneous workforce. I think it's almost a bit, sometimes I get the sense that you have to be all things to all people. But you then also realize that you obviously cannot be all things to all people. And therefore, how do you strike a balance? How do you really talk to someone who is looking for security and stability in life, while at the same time talking to someone else who's looking for, my relevance in the larger social good? So I think I think it's a very interesting time in the history of business and in the history of HR to be around here.
Very interesting indeed. And probably, if you look at the stats, a lot of compelling stats, though. You look at US, it seems a whopping 4.3 million of its workforce. In fact, they left the jobs to try something on their own. If you look at the survey done by OECD, which is Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, out of the 38 member countries, around 20 million of the workforce did not return to work. And that again says a lot. So, the new millennials thereof, they're looking at fulfillment. They're looking at work-life balance rather than the paychecks. They're looking at bringing their whole selves to work rather than bringing a fragment of their personality, which conforms to that particular culture. So they're very unbridled in terms of what they would like to do. And probably where those vocations or those engagements which does not give them that kind of a leverage, they rather quit rather than being probably a very soulful part of it. So yes, things have changed, things are changing, and probably you would have traversed those changes though, because you have seen HR by itself changing in its spectrum, in its definition by itself. So from IR to personnel management to HRM to human capital management to probably now it's very fondly call it as people and culture, really. So has the essence of HR changed? Because I'll just put in one particular probably thought that probably came in from one gentleman. He said, HR, we accept that we are human resources, but we are human first and resources later. So how do you demystify this particular animal called HR for us?
Well, I've seen it called industrial relations, personnel. I was the first employee relations manager in one of the companies I was in, and human resources. And I've heard people and culture. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've never had that designation as yet. But I think we need to dig a little deeper than the titles and the designations. And I see two distinct strands emerging. I think one is, of course, that the content of the role has changed. So I think it was genuinely true that at the time that I started working, for instance, my MBA was called a postgraduate diploma in PM and IR from XLRI, which is now called a PGD in HR.
Correct.
And that was the focus. It was industrial relations. And in fact, 10, 15 years before I graduated, it used to be called PGD in PM and IR and welfare or something like that. So it
Correct.
reflected the focus and the narrative of the function at that time.
Sure.
Of course, one of the great things about studying at XLRA was that, in a sense, you learned how to learn. And therefore, keeping pace with change was much, much easier, because quite honestly, the stuff that I studied in Excel on performance appraisal and training, for instance, would be considered primitive right now.
Correct.
And understandably, it's 40 years. It gives you a mindset and capabilities to move forward fast. So on the one hand, there is the narrative that has been changing around what is the function. And I think in the last 20 years or so, 15 to 20 years at least, has received a massive thrust. I think I would personally credit Dave Aldrich as a very, very inspirational thinker and speaker in the area of HR, and especially the four-box model. It talks about admin expert, change agent, employee champion, and so on. And I think that kind of really made all of us in the profession sit up and think, okay, where am I and where do I want to be? And where is the function in my organization headed, and so on. So that increase in task and capability complexity is welcome. It's something that I see as a positive upward trend. What the thought that got triggered off when I heard the first part of your question, which is this whole thing about, let's say, you were talking about the Great Resignation, and the emotional contract was what it triggered off in my mind.
Correct.
I think one of the things that COVID has done in the last 12 to 15 months or so is that, one, I think it's made people realize that life is short and it's unpredictable and bad things can happen. And it's important, therefore, to be clear about what you want to do and chase a dream. If this is not the dream that you want to chase, then go out and chase that dream.
Right.
But at the same time, I think while a lot of organizations have responded with sensitivity and with care, I think, without taking names, I would just say for some organizations, things could have been better. But with the bottom line, I think being that these level of sensitivity and emotional connect and caring that I see in some organizations really leaves a bit to be desired. And therefore, you do have a situation where people are saying, all right, I'll go. It's not really so important that I should stay for me. And the organization also, either because they're confused about how to respond, or because they genuinely maybe think that people are replaceable and therefore it doesn't matter, one goes, another will come, or something like that.
Correct.
So I see a decline in that level of connectedness, which I think is also one of the softer capabilities of HR. You need to be very emotionally connected with people and be able to intuit and understand what is happening. And I think that's a capability that we need to continually build. So if you look at the what's happening on the HR front, I think, so to summarize, the task and capability complexity is increasing, and the demands that it's making on people in HR is therefore increasing. At the same time, it's important not to lose sight of the fact that we are human, as you said, and we are human before resources.
Absolutely.
And this is the context in which I see that comment, that you do need to treat people as people, you need to connect with people as people.
Correct.
At the end of the day, there was a lovely little piece I read today. I think one of the new age companies, let's say the internet.com kind of companies, have reduced their notice period from 3 months to from 1 month to 15 days.
Okay.
And their CEOs made a very profound statement saying that we wouldn't like you to go, but if you do go, if you do want to go, we do believe that we shouldn't stand in your way. And 15 days is enough in these days of asynchronous work. 15 days is enough to achieve a handover, and we wish you all the best and hope you come back to us sometime. That, I think, represents it's a glimpse into what sensitivity looks like in practice.
Very true. I think probably
thought made sense. Yeah.
True, sir. And it probably will vary from the kind of HR and the evolved HR that really comes to play. I've been thinking about a particular notion, though. Probably it might sound a bit controversial, but like what we have, for different other vocations, should we also have some bit of a playbook? Say, for example, you're looking at your Maslow's need, right? And then you come in from the basic down to self-actualization. So should be a regulatory body for HR per se, which we say, fair enough, this is the hygiene factor which you got to do in tier 1. And tier 2 is when you get onto that development side. And tier 3 is when you start thinking as a strategic leader and probably being more commercial, being business partnering, and so on and so forth. So HR is, I mean, for different reasons, constantly caught up on the ops side. I mean, irrespective of what kind of vision or strategy that they are outlined for, the fact of the matter is more often than not, it becomes more of a compliance kind of a function. So, do you advocate the need to have some bit of a regulatory body for HR fraternity at large? A, to be able to equip aspiring HR leaders to say, fair enough, these are the benchmarks internationally, these are the best practices, which you have to be able to comply or conform to. And only then you actually go on to the next level. And that's how your title will also change and so on and so forth. Right now, it's just probably just a fish market, so to speak. Your thoughts?
I come at this question from a very different angle. I've been a little
Okay,
thoughtful while I was listening to you.
right.
Yeah, regulation of education would help,
Hmm.
no doubt about that. I think we have all kinds of MBA education providers in
Hmm.
different countries. Some of them are well known. Some of them are super premium in terms of quality.
Hmm.
Some of them don't make the cut, to put
Hmm.
it bluntly.
Yeah.
And I think some level of regulation would be ideal.
Hmm.
But how it would be enforced, how it would be implemented across
Hmm.
countries large. So I'm not talking about certification bodies of which there are several, like a CIPD or an
Correct.
SHRM or something like
Correct.
that. But regulation itself, ideally, self-regulation works best. But failing with some minimum standards in education. But
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
can't help thinking, Roy, that idea has never worked in most countries, in most educational fields. There are only two areas where it works well, really well. Two or
Right.
three, I'd
Right.
say, no, two maybe, chartered
Hmm.
accountancy or the accounting disciplines and the medical disciplines.
Hmm.
And they work well in those disciplines because there is one independent body in the country that sets the standard and then
Correct.
certifies the educational
Right.
facilities and awards the degree as well, or awards the qualification as well. Now,
Hmm.
unless we have something like that in HR, it could be a thought. But to me,
Right.
the larger issue, Roy, and I
Hmm.
think, or the different issue that gets triggered, and why I think we might, there's a different problem to address over here.
Yeah.
Over time, I think over an extended period of time, we as HR practitioners have tended to present this as an exotic, behavior-based, touchy-feely kind of function.
Hmm.
People will get demotivated, or if
Hmm.
people will get motivated, or people will be happy
Correct.
without trying to metricize. So if
Hmm.
people are happy, therefore, what does it do to my sales?
Very true.
Or if
Very
people are
true.
demotivated, what is it doing to my profitability? And there are ways to establish this equation. You could do
Correct.
multiple steps and say demotivated people, higher attrition, greater cost of replacement, greater number of people to replace, therefore
Correct.
impacts profitability, for instance.
Hmm.
I still don't see too many HR people talking numbers. I still don't see too many
Yeah.
HR people talking about the drivers of business, the levers of business. I mean,
Correct. Very true.
how many HR people do you know who lead businesses? Um,
Very true.
you
Very
know,
true. Correct.
where you hear, I mean, in the last 7-10 days, of course, Leena Nair has been
Of course. Yes.
dominating the headlines for a very well-deserved move from CHRO of Unilever to CEO of Chanel.
Chanel. Yeah.
But hopefully, this should not be such a rarity going forward. I think we
Yeah.
need to have a couple of high-profile moves of this sort from HR into
Correct.
line,
Correct.
and raising the stakes on HR itself, seeing that we talk numbers, we talk business, we
Correct.
demonstrate that we deliver value to the business,
Hmm.
because then that's the biggest certification there is. Because when a business leader says that my HR person adds value to the business, well, that's as good as it gets. Where that ties into your
Hmm.
question is that, therefore, if the standards that we set include something around metricization, around numbers, around the
Right.
measurement of the function,
Yeah.
then it would be a very good idea to have a central
Very true.
body
Very true.
regulating
Correct.
it, setting standards, awarding degrees. Perfect.
Yeah.
I think this is a educational gap that we need to plug somewhere.
Education, yes, Sameer, but you know what? I think there's a larger issue or a larger, animal to probably address in the room, which is more in terms of do the HR scope, the HR REMI really, substantiate a certain level of proficiency level wise. If you say, for example, we probably talk about assessment centers, we talk about psychometric assessments and all of that. But nobody asks the question as to, is that ingrained back internally in terms of your JDs and your competency frameworks and the benchmarking of salaries, your bench structures being really benchmarked right? And if that is not the case, then we're just doing a tick box exercise. Yeah. So, and that is something that I find alarming, because a lot of leaders that I'm in contact with and I probably engage with, CIPDs, SHRMs, and the titles are longer than they can probably write in a particular line. But they haven't done those hygiene factors right. For me, you'll have to be able to classify an organization or HR compliant or HR progressive by saying, fine, now you've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is benchmarked against international best practices as an HR practitioner. And then you move to the next stage. And on those values, are you then assessed further in terms of the large institutions like Great Places to Work, which probably will engage and assess organizations. And believe me, I think there's a lot of bag of salt, really. Even those organizations, the top 10, are not there in terms of really benchmark HR practices. And that is the acrimony that I have in my mind, and that is the frustration that I have as a part of the HR fraternity as well. As to more and more, we are just complying and probably just going with the flow rather than being a change agent. You can't be a change agent unless you have certain things lined up and outlined. So I'm not too sure how these things can be addressed, but I believe some bit of regulatory body probably who says that this is your quality of HR and this is how you're certified at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 might be a solution.
Could be.
Do you agree?
Could be, because I think, it's a pretty profound statement we made there. And I was thinking of what does it take to become a change agent? One is, I'd say, strategic thought, the depth of thinking to answer your question. So if I have a job description, or if I have a set of leadership competencies, how does that tie in backwards to my job descriptions, forward to an assessment center,
correct,
sideways into a recruitment process, furthermore into a succession planning process or a leadership development process, and so on. So one part of it is that's, to my mind, the strategic thinking, is being able to see how things connect, and the fact that all things at the end of the day are interconnected. The second is, I think, a high degree of self-awareness. Because if you aren't aware of your own motivations and your own feelings and your own defenses at different points in time, and you can't deal with them, you're not going to be very effective at, if I can't change myself, I can't change you. I won't even know where to start, because I will be operating from a zone of self-defense and protection. And the third, I think, is deep technical skills, which in the area of HR are well known. I think whether it's HR IT or HR MS, or whether it's appraisal framework, performance management frameworks, or recognition reward, and so on. All three come together, and then you have a spark. You need to have the right context as well, which is all about receptiveness of the organization to change. I mean, you can also argue that part of the change management process is creating receptiveness or creating a burning platform and so on. But I'm saying, broadly speaking, that the organization recognizes or is made to recognize that there is some need for change. And then when you pull that whole thing together, you have change agency. So part of it is, I know people who are technically very competent, or very good, at self-awareness and empathy, but you wouldn't really call them change agents.
Correct. Absolutely.
It's
not for a larger cause.
Yeah, it's for a larger cause, for a larger benefit. I would say that change agency operates. So, so where regulation would come in is on the deep technical skills bit. Regulation, or the educational regulation that we're talking about, and where it could also help is, for example, this whole thing about deep self-awareness and awareness of others. The thing about passion, strategic insight, that is developed. Strategy is a pretty loosely or pretty poorly understood concept and term even now. Frankly, you know a good strategy when you see it, but I think even the definitions of strategy are a little here and there most of the while. But I think so. That's possibly out of the purview right now.
Correct.
Science may develop over a period of time. But yes, I think the the deep technical skills bit and the self-awareness and awareness of others bit. And those two areas are very definitely where some standard setting could and should be
True,
done.
true. And probably, if I may just quote Egon Zehnder, Egon
Mm.
Zehnder came back with a survey where they said that increasingly CXO suite are hired for their hard skills and fired for the soft. So which means there's a lot of emphasis in terms of intangibles. People
Yeah.
might get certified in terms of the hard skills on technical
Yeah.
education and all that, but still they don't succeed. And a lot has to do with culture. Now, a superstar in environment X might not succeed in environment Y, not because it's not good, but because the culture precedes him, the
Yeah.
culture subsedes him, and so on and so forth. So hence, how do you address the animal called culture? Because obviously, as a change agent, change catalyst, and all of that, HR, unless and until they have the buy-in or a, let's say, influential seat in the board, they're not able to drive change, no matter what you do, right? And so, how do you see that changing? Yes, we will have Lena Nair probably coming out and probably showing to the world that HR can also be a prospective CEO. That should be the case going forward. But those cases are very few, and the reason being that there is no influencing seat in the board for HR per se. So, how do you see that changing, though?
I think it's incumbent on HR leaders to make out a case for themselves. I think stop being embarrassed, stop being modest, stand up and say, I have value to add, and this is value that I have added. This is what I have done. The seat at the strategic table is not given to anyone as a matter of generosity or as a matter of charity.
Correct.
Yeah. Why at the end of the day is it that no one really argues whether a CFO should have a seat at the strategy table or not? It's because they talk numbers.
Because of the value.
And they talk about the levers of value, the levers of profitability, the levers of sales. They can talk about what's happening around the corner. You don't speak the language of business, you are not going to be there.
Absolutely.
And I think it's absolutely important, and that calls for one, of course, a lot of hard understanding in terms of what it takes to drive a business and what is important in a business and so on. But like I said, stop being modest and stop being embarrassed. Step up and say that there's value that I have to add, and this is how I'm doing it. And then, of course, do it. So obviously, that's how credibility is built, and that's how you retain your seat at the table, because half the battle is getting there, the other half is staying there. As is pretty evident. Culture is a call that you have to. I personally think it's very important to find a place where the values resonate with yours. Now, culture has its own nuances. There are always things that you can do, can't do. How open can you be? How aggressive can you be? How direct can you be? And then these company cultures also operate in the context of a national culture, which also makes its own demands. I think travel helps, if you ask me. Travel helps, and seeing different cultures in different parts of the world, how different people do things is always at the time that it happens, it can be quite a difficult experience. But in retrospect, when I look back on it, I'm so much richer for all the experiences that I've had and all the different things that I've done and gone through at different points in time. If you don't have the capacity to engage with differences in culture and to do things differently, then it's a problem. Because if you cannot decode the culture of your organization, and if you can't, know how to tweak that culture, where the culture needs to be tweaked and where it needs to be kept intact. And every culture has its own artifacts. There are some things that you simply will not be able to touch. It would be almost the same as saying that I'm excluding myself from this organization. And there are things you can touch. There are things you can move around with and play with and so on. So I think it's important to recognize that that's the space you're operating in, and that's what you need to do. So, for instance, personally, if I could digress for a minute, I find it very strange when people leave their home country, go to another country, even on a holiday, go to another country, thousands of kilometers away, and then come back saying that they loved it because they got the same food that they get back home. And part of me is like, why did you go there? What did you go there for?
You didn't explore,
If it was not to explore the culture, and if it was not to explore what happens there, then fine, you could have just stayed at home. But that's my thought anyway. But that's part of, to me, that's part of a mindset of curiosity and willingness to explore. Go do different things, try different things, see what happens. At worst,
True.
you'll have an unpleasant experience and come back and say that was unpleasant, but you still have learned from it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure, and probably it's not as easy a ride as we say it though, because there are different complexities interwoven, intertwined in terms of HR by itself. But having said that, now if we have to probably look at Sameer and probably for aspirant HR practitioners rather, if you had some bit of kind of message for them in terms of, let's say, a very crude playbook in terms of fan, if you got something on a very clean slate, on a white slate, and if you had to develop the HR function from scratch, what would be your building blocks rather in terms of making HR a very robust function? What would you start off with? And where would you say, fair enough, I think we have reached somewhere?
No, actually, I did that in one of the roles that I did. I set up an HR function from scratch that didn't
Right.
exist earlier.
If you can share.
India Gypsum Limited.
Okay.
But at there, I took the route of actually I took the Ulrich model. I started I would say with admin expert, employee champion, and strategic partner.
Okay.
And to a lesser extent, change agent, because everything was new. So in the sense, I mean, you could argue that it was a high level of change agency, or you could argue that it was not, because everything I was doing was new. But it was basically all about identifying gaps in the business and plugging them first. So,
Okay.
starting from drafting an appointment letter, drafting an offer letter, setting up a recruitment process, interviewing candidates, do a reward survey, set up a salary structure, improve efficiency, set up a factory, whatever. And then for my pains, also had to do the same thing in different parts of Asia after that.
Right.
But I think so. For me, it started then, and I think this is still a good formula to follow. Is what's the gap in the business that you're trying to plug? And the business will have some visible gaps and some painful gaps, and those are
very
easiest to plug. Easiest may not be right, may not be easiest, but it's the biggest need. So it probably gives you biggest impact if you plug those gaps first.
Sure.
If I've got a hiring and retention problem, if you've got a hiring and retention problem, and I come to you and say I've got this wonderful model for succession planning, not really going to work now, because your reaction is going to be people don't stay. I mean, what kind of succession am I going to plan? So meet the evident need first, but then what that does is to give you credibility as a function, and then you can use your own strategic skills and your own awareness to start surfacing needs that don't. So, for example, if you have a hiring and attrition problem, I solve that, and then I can sit down with you and say, Roy, where do you think your business is going to be 1 year from now? What kind of capabilities that you need then? And chances are higher that you'll be more willing to talk to me then, and we can engage in a more productive and stable conversation in terms of what we need to do going forward.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's typically how I've approached it in the past. I mean, there are different ways of doing it. I know different people have tackled it differently, but this, for me, this has worked generally quite well. Yeah.
So probably in hindsight, as you look back, are there certain things that you would have probably gone back and probably you thought over it and said, I could have done it in a slightly different manner, probably in hindsight, and that's what you did. Probably in Unilever or in Dabur as well.
Well,
sure.
I think if you look at me personality-wise, I think I've always been a little more impatient than I mean, it has been good in some ways because it's delivered results fast.
Sure.
But when I look back on it, sometimes I think the flip side of that impatience is that you need to be really careful that you're being sensitive to people's feelings and the emotions that they bring to the workplace and how you deal with them. Right. So it took me some time to crack that code, that you have to be ruthless in the decision making, but very, very emotional and sensitive in the communication. And unless you do that, you end up disturbing one of the two equations. You'll either disturb the business with an emotional decision, or you'll disturb people with a very hard-nosed kind of communication, which doesn't work. So I think that is something that I would have looked at more. I would have probably taken a break and traveled around a bit more earlier than I did. As it was the first 5 or 6 years of my career were in metro cities. I was in Bombay, Bangalore, and Chennai. And later on thinking, maybe I had my first big learning experience when I moved to rural India in a factory. And I think maybe I should have done that much earlier, frankly. Probably. That would have provided more diversity of experience, I guess. Yeah.
Correct.
Some things.
Fantastic. And one particular thought that comes across at various forums is, the automation, technologies, AI, VR, and interconnectivity, and all of that. And probably Elon Musk, if he had to be believed, he would say that probably we are all cyborgs in our own right at this point in time, and things are gonna get very difficult probably for something that robot cannot do and what humans can compete with. So, how do you see that side of HR shaping up, though? In terms of workforce mobility, workforce specifications? Are we, as we move into AI and so on and so forth, do you think the reliance on human skills are gonna get
Well,
set back?
yeah, I think it's picking up pace, and I do know that AI and robotics are being used in
Mm.
recruitment and training and
Yes.
induction, onboarding. I think a lot more areas.
Yeah.
I think it's taking a lot of the grunge work away from HR, and that's good. This is not really the best use of HR time, and of
Mm.
course, and I think there are the usual learning hiccups along the way. So I think in
Mm.
recruiting AI, for example, I think one of the early forerunners found that all the biases that people displayed had
Mm.
got logged onto the machine, so the machines were displaying the same biases. So
So,
they had to get in
right,
because
right.
that's how you program the
Correct.
data. So
So it's
it's
ego, right?
so
Garbage
when
in,
I
garbage
make
out. Yeah.
when the algorithm is based on the selection decisions that
Right.
you and I and a million others like you and me take,
Very true.
we
Very
have biases. So the machine
correct.
picks up those biases and absorbs them as algorithm.
Right.
So of course they had to change the algorithm and restart the entire process. But that's learning hiccups. That's learning curve, and I'm sure that he get sorted out. I think it's very early days. There's a
Mm.
lot more work that needs to be done, and it's for the good. I think the more we
Mm.
go down that road, the faster. But with robust processes that
Yeah.
with a good deal of governance around them,
Mm-hmm.
we should be in a much better place. And I think that gives HR people time
Mm.
to be more strategic
More
partners
strategic.
and more change agents. And
Correct.
that's where we make a
Correct.
difference.
So probably you are one of those proponents who believe that what C.K. Prahlad sometime back said co-competence. But HR should focus on this co-competence, which is practical and strategic, rather than on the admin transaction operations side. Correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where we should be.
Mm.
I'm not saying that the reality is
Mm.
that our core competence right now might be admin and operations.
Mm. Sadly so, because we are not going to
Sadly
move
so.
away from them.
Sadly so. So Prahlad doesn't say that you should be there. He says, what is your core competence? Take a
Correct.
good hard look at it. So in that
Correct.
sense, core competence may not be the best way to describe it.
Mm.
But I think our strength areas should be there,
Mm.
strategy and change, and less. You still need to know operations and services and so on, so that you keep track and you stay on top of what's happening there.
Mm.
But it shouldn't be that you stay there because you can't go beyond that.
Correct.
That's the
So
stuff to avoid.
yeah. So one more thought, that probably that I want to share with you, rather is because a lot of changes and a lot of things that we can do is also system agnostic or system centric or sector centric, rather, right? So a lot of things on the manufacturing side that you would not be able to do what the fintech will do and so on and so forth. But having said that, you are faced with plethora of options that you can choose from, and you would want to be the change agent to lead your organization to that change. Having said that, how do you choose? How do you assess that my organization is at stage one of being evolved, and probably it has to do certain hygiene factors before it goes into stage 2 and 3 and 4, where it will really arrive to be able to look at those technologies or programs.
I think there are several models that can be used. So PCMM is, I think, one of the more well-established and frequently used ones.
Hmm.
And there are others as well, I'm sure, that would be available off the shelf, or you could even have a diagnostic designed for your organization in terms
Hmm.
of what you want to do.
Hmm.
Um, I think you make an important point. Therefore, it's not about jumping to the highest level because it's there.
Hmm.
I think very clearly, if you don't go through some of the basic steps first and go through the
Correct.
rigor and the drill of getting firm processes into place and
Hmm.
systems into place, you really won't be able to advance very much beyond that. So,
Hmm.
so in a manner of speaking, there's no point in saying that I want to top the Great Places to Work survey this year. I don't
True.
know what I've done and what I'm going to do, but I want to top it. It's not going to happen, or if it happens,
Correct. Correct.
it may happen by fluke, and you still
Hmm.
won't know what got you there, and what you
Absolutely.
need to work on. So I think that's an important one. That's where maturity models help a
Hmm.
lot. Assessment
Correct.
models help a lot, and I would often look sometimes to an external person, an external consultant or agency to
Hmm.
help me get a handle on that.
Correct.
That would
And
be
so
pretty
probably,
useful.
Yeah, so probably it brings me back to that particular notion of a playbook concept. You say, okay, as an HR, your organization is operationally ready, or transactionally ready, or tactically ready, or strategically ready. And thereafter, you have those tick boxes, if I may use it for a lack of a better word. You say OD is in place, benchmark, PMS is in place, benchmark right. Your succession planning, your grading, and all of the compensation service are all right. Your TA processes are right, and so on and so forth. So once those, you climb those ladders, and then you climb over those 3 tiers rather: operations, tactical, and being on the strategic. But unless that happens, I think it's a bit of a mixed match. It's a bit of a gray area where certain organizations might not be strategically HR focused, but they would have reached there, and vice versa as well. So I think unless we have a playbook where you say, okay, you know what, if you've done X, Y, Z, probably you are here. ABC, you are there, and so on and so forth. And that's how you graduate well.
That makes sense. That makes sense, actually. If you have something like that, that'll be good.
Yeah, fair enough. And you must be a movie aficionado. Probably you would have watched a lot of movies, probably, probably some characters in the books and all that. Any particular characters that resonates with you, though? I'd like to
I am more into books most of the while. I do a lot more reading than I do watching. I watch films in theaters. I can't bring myself to sit in front of a TV or anything like that.
Right.
No, there's a lot of very interesting stuff I'm reading right now. I've currently just finished something on authentic leadership by an ex-CEO of Medtronic. I just got a copy of Catalyze by Chris Shankar, Dreamers and Unicorns by Abhijit Baduri. I read a lot, so there's a lot of stuff that I'm going into right now and understanding further.
Amazing. So probably last few questions for you rather. Now you look at assessing people, and I'm sure you would be a part of the interview panel when you look at hiring a lot of CXO suite. So is there any particular one question that probably is always your standard or your favorite in terms of saying, fair enough, I get a response, and the response is what will define whether he or she fits the bill or not?
Which is the experience in the last 2 or 3 years that you learned the most from, and how and why?
Correct. The same question was posed to Elon Musk, and he says, I just asked one particular question. That is what? Tell me the story of your life. And then as he goes to the story of life, then, he justifies the rationales and so on and so forth, then he's found out. Satya Nadella has a very different way of doing it.
Yeah, it's basically to understand people's motivations and drives and what excites you and what energizes you and so on. So then really you get an insight into that. That tells you a lot more about the person than
Correct. Right, Sameer. So you've had a very checkered career so far, and you've really traversed continents and traversed different roles to probably doing what you do best now. What is it that you'd love to be doing next? What is next for Sameer? Probably even in your current role, what are those so-called utopian goals?
I think we're in the middle of something very exciting at Cadila Pharmaceuticals, which is again all about creating a performance-oriented culture, creating a great place to work,
wonderful,
getting basic systems and processes into place in HR,
brilliant,
and creating an employer brand. Those are some of the things we're working on right now, and I think we've just started off the journey. I think it's in a taking shape rapidly and moving forward, and that's exciting. It's a good place to be in right now, and I think that's going to take up a lot of my time and energy in the near future, the middle future as well. So,
fantastic.
Whatever spare time I have, I read, and that's all that takes up my time right now.
Brilliant, Sameer. And cheers to that. And I wish you all the very best in terms of your continual journey of creating excellence for your organizations and for your peers. Keep sharing the insights, keep sharing your knowledge. It's very valuable indeed. So I wish you all the very best. Do stay safe, take care of your health, and keep shining, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roy. It's been great talking to you. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. Yes, we shall certainly stay in touch, and you also stay safe, be happy, have a great year ahead. We're almost into 2022 now.
Take care.
Right. Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
If you've liked this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified for future episodes.